The bright side of addiction is recovery. And recovery is a lived experience. Now, if you're new to our podcast, we welcome you. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if you are in recovery or know or love someone who is, or maybe you simply want to know more about recovery and the process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love who's harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you. As we carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder that you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured singer-songwriter Bonnie Raitt, former astronaut Buzz Aldrin, actor John Larroquette, authors Brene Brown, Anne Lamott, J.A. Jance, former NFL players Ryan Leaf and Thomas Hollywood Henderson. All these interviews and more on our website, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, and their path. In this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, we put a face and a voice on recovery. We meet Erin Slagle. She's a young woman who is standing up and speaking out about her recovery, celebrating 15 years of recovery. Her insight, her excitement is palpable. She shares her amazing journey. Now, I posted a photo of Erin in the podcast notes. Take a look-see. She's a beautiful woman who has an amazing story. Here's a quick clip from the interview.
Like, to me, going to a tailgate, there's no reason, because all I did when I tailgated was drink my face off. But there's also so many other things that I like doing more now. And it's like you realize and you start to live your life, like actually living and not just drinking. And it's so much better. And you're like, there's no reason to go back. And it took me a long time to get there. But I'm there now, and it's so much better.
My delightful conversation with Erin Slagle is coming right up. And a little later in the podcast, we're going to hear from an award-winning actress and another woman in long-term recovery, ALi McGraw, reflecting on self-worth. Following 17 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, our podcast features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery. Plus, well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast and to share it with your friends. Recovery is an American way of life. And if you'd like to help us out financially or know of a foundation that may be interested in underwriting our program, we'd be ever so grateful. A reminder, our email address, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. We would love to hear from you. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recovery Coast to Coast, supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. And there's a ton of treatment centers out there. Many of them are really good, by the way, providing good quality treatment. Others, well, they're simply bad actors looking to fill beds and make a financial profit. Sundown M Ranch is a not-for-profit treatment center that has been successfully treating patients for over 55 years, one patient at a time. Their treatment is abstinence-based. It's 12-step centered. They provide a full range of services, including detox, education, individual therapy, group therapy, exercise, chaplain services. They have a comprehensive family program, continuing care planning, and an introduction to self-help programs, plus recovery enhancement, and even a volunteer nicotine cessation program if you're so inclined. And they don't just treat and release. They follow their patients after inpatient treatment, getting them back into the community. Their motto is, "The patient is the reason we are here." And it's true. They work with most major insurance plans, and they can work with you to help secure funding through Prosper Health Lending. That's the premier financing company in the behavioral health field. Treatment doesn't just cost, it saves. It saves relationships. It saves jobs. It saves reputations. Most of all, it saves lives. Sundown owns their own land, 30 acres at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon, which is just outside of Yakima, not far from Seattle. If you're looking for a treatment program that has been successful for over 55 years and has a compassionate staff and a program whose bottom line is long-term recovery, consider Sundown. Check out their website for more information and take a look at their facility, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown.org. Well, it's coffee time for me, and perhaps for you as well, as I share a wonderful conversation with Erin Slagle, a woman in long-term recovery. By the way, remember to check out her inspiring photo. I've put that in the podcast notes. Our guest in this segment is a woman who lives back in Baltimore, just outside of Baltimore. Her name is Erin Slagle. She has been in recovery for 15 years, one day at a time. I was on Facebook and I saw a picture of Erin holding a sign, and she was recovering out loud is what she was doing. The big sign said 15 years. How are you, Erin?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I want to start. What does recovery mean to you today? You're over 15 years sober. What does it mean to you today?
That's a big question because it means everything, really. I would not be who I am right now without my recovery. I wouldn't. Nothing that I have accomplished in the last 15 years, and that includes my family, that includes everything that I've done in terms of career, none of that would have happened without being in recovery.
Take us back to the beginning of your recovery journey. I understand you went through an inpatient treatment program at one point?
I did. I was 26 years old, and I think most people when they were 26 would not, or at least most of the people, my friends and the people in my life, you're in your 20s, you're kind of, a couple years outside of college, you're still kind of partying, you're still going out and stuff. And I just got to the point where it finally hit me that if I didn't do this, I was going to end up killing myself or somebody else. Got to that point. Went to an inpatient facility it was actually designed to be 7 to 10 days program, and they ended up keeping me for 17 days. It was a very surreal time just because a lot of it is you're detoxing, you're getting rid of something that you've become so reliant on, and then just the emotional side of it, knowing that your life will never be the same from that point forward. So it was pretty intense.
What precipitated you going into treatment? Were there consequences leading up to that?
I hit my quote-unquote rock bottom, but it kind of took a few times. It was like a cumulative effect almost, and it finally was just like I got tired of disappointing every single person in my life. Nobody could rely on me. Nobody could depend on me. Nobody could believe anything I was saying. I was constantly letting people down, constantly letting myself down. And I just was tired of the person I was. It was a huge bit of shame and finally being confronted about this problem I had, but also this sense of relief in there, in the sense that I was like, this is it. I can't do this anymore. I was like, all right, let's go. I have to do this.
How old were you when you took a first drink?
I was trying to think about, I have weird memories of having sips of alcohol or of beer when I was really young, and that kind of weird bubbly taste or whatever that, all the adults are like, it's an acquired taste and all that kind of stuff. But my first time of drinking and being like, oh, this feeling's pretty cool, 13 or 14.
And you liked it?
I liked the feeling of it. Absolutely. Yeah.
What about your family? You have brothers and sisters?
Yes. I come from a very loving, supportive, wonderful family. I have 3 older brothers. My mom and dad were always around.
When things started to get bad for you, was there anyone in your life, family members or friends, that said, hey, Erin, you got to slow down. You got to change your life around. You're out of control.
I heard that various points throughout. As early as high school, because I was a soccer player and it was a huge part of who I was. My drinking started to interfere with soccer. I remember my parents, if my parents caught me, they would be really upset and disappointed. But it was almost, in the beginning, it was kind of like a rite of passage for every high school kid, I think. I don't want to say every high school kid, but for a lot of them, experimenting with drinking is kind of part of childhood in a sense. But then as it became more apparent that I was doing this, I think, more than other people or to a further extreme than other people, my parents would, expressed concern. And I had a soccer coach that expressed concern and teammates who were getting upset with me. And then throughout college, I had some other friends who were like, your level with this is different than others. Just a lot of different people throughout my life. I think like a lot of people, you try to brush it off, or you think that they're overreacting, or you tell yourself, oh, I have it under control, or I'll dial back for a little bit and then I'll fix this.
Was there an intervention that was done on you, or did you just decide I'm going into treatment?
So going into treatment, it was primarily, it was my family. It was my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, and it was my work. They kind of found out what was happening, and my boss is also a very good friend of mine. A lot of companies or jobs could have just fired someone and told them, get your life together. But she actually connected with my mom, and they kind of developed a plan together, and she really invested in me. I think she just believed in me more than I believed in myself at the time. She fought for me, and she was like, you've got to do this, and this is what you're going to do if you want to continue to work here, but we're going to support you through it too, which is not the norm. So I was really, really fortunate in that sense.
So you go into treatment, a little bit of anger, perhaps?
If I was angry at anyone, it was myself. It just got to the point where I couldn't blame anyone, because I was literally just, like I said, nobody could depend on me. Nobody could rely on me. And I was just kind of like going through the motions, saying I'd be somewhere, making up excuses if I wasn't, claiming I had a headache when really I was probably hungover. So I couldn't be mad at anybody else. It was just me.
What were those 17 days like?
When you're that addicted to something and they take it away, and I think a lot of people don't realize that detoxing from alcohol is actually very dangerous. Physical side of it was I was just kind of like in a stupor. I was just, you don't feel great. You're shaky. You feel a little nauseous. And then you're just like really ashamed. You're scared and all that stuff. They had to wake us up every few hours during the night, the first couple of nights, just to check on you. And they're giving out medication for certain things. And I just remember I got in there, and one of the like facilitators or therapists, that he just sat and looked and said, look around this room, because statistically speaking, 2 of you are going to last in your recovery. And I just remember sitting there going, I'm going to be one of those 2. It was just not a question in my mind at that point, because I knew that if I kept going, and I was one of the younger people, I think, but I was looking around going like, and a lot of those people were back for the second or third time. And I was like, I don't want this to be my life anymore. I don't want this. So I was there and I was meeting people, and it was crazy to hear the stories. I mean, there was people there for alcohol. There was people there for drugs. There was people there for like, they got, they went to a dental appointment and they got hooked on like Vicodin or pain medication or something. And it kind of opens your eyes to know that addicts aren't just that, portrayal that you see on movies and things. Like, they're everywhere, everyone. It affects everybody. It doesn't discriminate in any way. I also remember I didn't want to leave.
Yeah, it's kind of like that became your family there for 17 days.
Yeah, and I was scared. Like, when you're in there, you know that there's no way to be tempted. There's no way. Like, it's a safe place, right? And they tell you what to do each day. You're going through this stuff, and I was scared to leave. I didn't expect that part. When I first went in there, I was like, I can't wait to go home. And then when you get in there and you realize, oh, when I go out there, I've got to do all this stuff on my own. And that was really scary.
Did your family participate in any family conferences or therapy at all?
So I was there over Thanksgiving. It was kind of depressing at times.
Sure.
Because you're like, it's the start of the holiday season and here you are. I remember they had like a bunch of videos that we could watch at certain times, and we watched like Christmas Vacation and Christmas movies, and I was like, where am I right now? Like, what's happening? But I specifically told my family not to come for the Thanksgiving like time that they would allow, because I just didn't want. I just couldn't. I was like, I need less outside connection right now, because I think it would make it harder and more depressing in a sense. My family wrote letters, and I was able to write to them. We were able to call like a few times, but it was almost harder for me to talk to them a lot. But they were incredibly supportive, and my mom and a couple of my brothers came. Again, my boyfriend at the time came for like one of the sessions that they could come and do like a family session together. My family's also scattered, so they weren't all local to come.
So on that 17th day, when it's time for Erin to get back into the real world with all of the temptation and the logistical problems, What happens in that first couple of weeks? How difficult was it, and what did you do to maintain your recovery?
Once I got out, I had to continue outpatient treatment. And in the beginning, that was 5 days a week for like group sessions. And I had to go to a certain number of meetings, and I had to have a sponsor that I checked in with. So it wasn't totally like treatment was done. And it was obviously different than inpatient treatment, but it was still something that I had to be accountable for. And I think that helped, even though it was at times like, I don't want to go to this session today or whatever. I also, at that time, did not tell a lot of people where I had gone or what was happening with me. The people that were close to me obviously knew, but I wasn't open about my recovery then because there was still, I just felt like there was such a huge stigma around it. The first couple of weeks, I think we told people that I had gone to Alabama where my parents live to like my dad had been sick, or we made up some story, and I don't actually remember all the details, but it was something about my dad was sick or something, and I had to go home and help. So it was kind of like stressful because people were like, oh, how is that? How is everything going? And I had to just kind of go, yeah, good, thank you, blah, 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 And that wasn't because everybody else thought that I needed to make up a story. It was just I was not comfortable yet sharing my recovery because I didn't want the looks. I didn't want the, like that stigma that still felt very attached to people that were in recovery from anything. But that's kind of how I remember the beginning being.
And how did that change for you?
Eventually, I started to realize that the recovery part was nothing to be ashamed of. If anything, it was something to be incredibly proud of. My life in active addiction was what I should have been more ashamed of. So eventually it got to the point where I just, my sobriety is a huge part of my life, and I'm pretty vocal about it. Not just for me, but for other people, because I remember when I first got sober, one of the first things I wanted to know was who else was doing this? Who else was sober? Who else? You want to know that you're not alone. It was kind of dumb, but I remember looking up celebrities who were sober just because you couldn't like go around asking people like, are you sober? Do you know anyone who's sober? Obviously there's, AA meetings and there's things that you can go to, but even AA, a whole part of that is it's anonymous. People weren't openly just talking about their sobriety. So I was like, what celebrities are sober? That became really important to me to talk about and to let people know, like, it's not anything to be ashamed of. It's not anything to be, alone in, and it doesn't have to be anonymous.
You mentioned that you got a sponsor right off the bat. How did that work out for you? Did that help?
It was good at the time. AA for me was hugely helpful in the beginning in that I got to go and hear other people's stories about, identify with other stories. And it not only helped me realize I wasn't alone, but it also solidified for me like how big my problem was. Because when you hear the stories of when they hit rock bottom and it's something that you do kind of consistently or did, and you're like, oh, I did have a really big problem. Like, you could try to convince yourself when people try to confront you about your drinking or your relationship with alcohol, and they try to tell you that you've got problems, and in your mind you're like, no, I don't. They don't know me. Like, I've got this. But when you go to those meetings and you hear other people talk about those same things they're doing and how bad that is, and you're like, oh, that's me too. Like, AA in that sense was a help for me in that it wasn't just a support, but it was like it kind of solidified and really put everything into like focus for me. I didn't love the secrecy of it. I didn't love the whole like, hey, it's anonymous. Hey, we have to, keep this from everybody else. I don't know. There was just parts of it that I didn't totally align with. And I also had some other people that were super close or that are still, super close in my life that I could talk to and like fellowship with. Like they say that if you have two people in a room, that's a meeting, right? Like you don't have to actually go to a meeting.
Two people in a room with a coffee pot, I might add.
Right. So that kind of thing worked better for me. Finding those people that I could have like legitimate, real conversations with and get meaningful support and connection with and not feel like I had to go sign up and show up just to be part of something.
You've developed some new, significant, and strong relationships in early sobriety. And yep. You've maintained that through the 15 years.
Yeah, and it eventually got to the point, I mean, it takes a while, but you get to the point where you realize life is so much better and you don't want to go back. There's a lot of things I couldn't do for a long time. Like I still haven't gone to a concert. I still haven't gone to a tailgate because to me, those things were so like they just revolved around drinking. It's almost, and it's kind of a trigger, I guess, a cliche, but it's true. Like when you do something that was like, to me, going to a tailgate, there's no reason because all I did when I tailgated was drink my face off. But there's also so many other things that I like doing more now. And it's like you realize and you start to live your life, like actually living and not just drinking. And it's so much better. And you're like, there's no reason to go back. And it took me a long time to get there, but I'm there now and it's so much better.
Who's been the most significant person in your recovery?
That's a tough question because there's a lot of people that definitely got me here. My mom has always been, she never ever gave up on me as much as I'm sure I broke her heart over and over. My husband is absolute my rock in every sense. I mean, he is also sober, so that helps tremendously. Our stories are very different, so it's just we're able to talk about things and when we need to, which is amazing. I have a few friends who were just super honest with me, but also not in a judgmental way and more of like a concerning way, like there's something bigger going on that you need to get help with. And as much as I was a crappy friend to them, I'm sure at different times, they never gave up on me or saw me as less than a person. And my brothers, I have 3 older brothers who were and are supportive in different ways. And my dad too. I mean, it's almost like you're redeeming yourself, you're rebuilding your life. And there's these key players who played different parts in that. Their parts are pretty different, but they're just as important.
What about the friends that you partied with and hung out with during the drinking days? Once you found your way into recovery, what was it like when you ran into them or saw them or spoke to them?
I lost track with a lot of them because you realize that some of them were just party friends. And, that's kind of heartbreaking, but it's the truth. And I think that you have friends in your life that come for different reasons. So I moved around a lot growing up, and that just was something that I found anyways. Like, there's different phases of life. You were a different person in different parts of your life. So you're naturally going to have different friends and acquaintances for those various phases and parts of your life. But yeah, the people that were like the big time partiers with me, some of them still do it. And, I'm not one of those people that goes around now and says like, well, drinking's terrible for everyone and nobody should touch it. And, I don't feel that. Like, I feel like if you can go out and you can drink and you can have fun, good on you. That doesn't bother me. But I do know some people now that I'm like, yeah, they should probably stop. And I still have some people that did kind of distance themselves from me or cut off their friendship with me because of things that ways I acted, or they just got tired of, not being able to trust me and rely on me. And, I lost those friendships, and those still hurt because there's a couple people that I think really would have continued to remain friends for the duration. And knowing that it was probably my actions that drove them away, that definitely sucked. That hurt. But some things in life you can't change.
You mentioned that your husband, then your boyfriend, was sober. Did he get sober before you going into treatment, or did that come afterwards?
No, he actually, a friend of ours who was another very important person in my recovery. When I was 26 years old, and when I first realized I needed to stop drinking, and this friend of mine was like, I have another friend who's about a year sober, and you should talk to him and meet him. And I did, just because there's not a lot of 26-year-olds, at least not in my, circle, who were sober. Or if they were sober, it was somebody who just was like, I've never drank before. And I needed to connect with somebody else who was doing what I was doing, again, to kind of see how it could be done. So I met him for coffee, and we stayed in close contact in the beginning because he knew that it's hard when you're in your 20s and you're trying to stop drinking. And eventually, we just started dating, and then we got married.
Wow.
So he was with me. Like I connected with him, and I stayed sober for about 6 months, trying to do it on my own, right? Trying to do like going to the meetings and do it on my own. And then I relapsed, and that's when I went into treatment.
What is life like for you now today? You're 15 years sober. You have a beautiful family. You've got a husband, you have two children, and you have an amazing career. Tell me about the career.
I've become like a business owner twice over now.
Wow.
We have two kids. I'm PTA president of my kids' school.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
I was joking with a friend the other day that I was like, people write me down as an emergency contact for their kids now. That's nothing that would have ever been possible 15 years ago. So it's little things like that where you're like, I'm just a good person now. And that wasn't that I wasn't a good person before, but I was a good person making really terrible, terrible decisions because I had demons that were just taking over.
Did you go back to work with your boss when you got out of treatment?
Yes, I stayed there for a while. I went back and I actually took on an administrative role. It was at a school, and my former boss is still a very good friend of mine, and she's watched my kids grow up, and we're close. So I'm just a very different person than I was 15 years ago.
Tell me about being an entrepreneur.
That was something that kind of just randomly came about. I started getting into direct sales like 2015-ish. It kind of sparked this entrepreneurial side of me that I didn't know was there, but once I kind of got a taste for it, I realized I really, really liked it. From there, it just kind of grew, and most recently, I do like social media management and help other businesses and entrepreneurs strategize and create their presence on social media. It would not be happening without recovery. Once I kind of embraced my recovery and was more vocal and open about it, I realized I had a lot more to share and say. My social media management and my entrepreneurial side really doesn't connect with my recovery at all. Like I'm not out there talking about recovery in a business sense in any way, but like it connected me with you. You get out there, and when you feel like you have something important to say or you have a way to help people, and then you start realizing, oh, I have other stuff to say too. And it kind of builds your confidence and your voice overall. I've had a lot of other people connect with me through social media when they see my posts about my recovery. And it's been a way for me to help support other people too, which is amazing because I think that's what everybody needs, especially in the beginning, is just somebody to go, you can do this. It's not a lost cause, and it's worth it.
So you have inspired others by recovering out loud. When people come up
Yes.
to you and basically say, Erin, how did you do it? I have a problem and I don't know what to do.
I usually start by telling them that I think that they're amazing for reaching out, because I know that was probably one of the hardest things that I had to try to consider in the beginning. But I also tell them, what I do is going to look different than from whatever you figure out. And that's part of it, is that you have to figure out what it's going to look like for you. So I usually try to encourage people to reach out and find meetings. Or if it's really bad, I try to connect them with an inpatient or an outpatient rehab facility if that's needed. I make sure that they have somebody else that knows about it, because I can't be a lifeline for everybody as much as I wish I could. I think that's something that no one can really put on themselves, especially if you're in recovery yourself. I remember one of our therapists always said, like, be careful when you meet other people in recovery that you don't get dragged down if they have a bad day type of thing. I think everybody needs to have a strong support system, and however big or small they want that system to look or be is up to them. But just having somebody that they can reach out to when things especially get really bad or feel really heavy. It's mostly just trying to encourage them that, it's possible and it's doable. And, I'll tell them about a few books that I've read, or, Instagram accounts to follow. There's a lot more of a presence, I think, now about being in recovery and not being that, the AA anonymous side of it, but being more vocal and more open about it. And I think that helps people when it's not like this secret society that you have to be ashamed of type of thing, but it's more of a, listen, this is the way that people are living now too. It's not a bad thing. It's not a deficit in you. It's not anything wrong with you. It's actually a really solid strength to have if you are able to live your life sober.
I often say recovery is an American way of life.
It is.
How is your recovery, Erin, different today than it was, say, 5 years ago? There's a lot of talk about relapse and relapse prevention. I prefer to use the term recovery enhancement. How is your recovery different today than it was yesterday? And hopefully it'll be better tomorrow than it is today. How are things changed for you over the last, say, 5 years?
That's a really interesting question. I feel like my recovery just gets stronger and stronger in a sense that it just becomes more and more a part of who I am. I also am just more comfortable and more aware of what's a good idea for me and what's not. I have zero problems now. Like if I'm invited to a party or, some sort of social gathering or whatever, I have zero problems walking out early if I need to. Or, there was a point where it was scary to think of going to these places because you were like, oh, I got to tell people or I got to stay away from the bar or I got to how am I going to walk out and not have everybody looking at me? And you kind of get to a point where you're like, hey, everyone's not looking at me. If I need to leave a place early, I can leave a place early. There's this big scene of going to wineries and things like that. And I'm more comfortable declining those invitations. So I think it's just a strength and that my lifestyle is different. And I like it much better this way. I kind of prioritize my family and my health and, working out and just being with my family and not feeling like we need to go have a really full social calendar at all times. And doing more for others has helped a lot too. Just trying to not just survive and live, but making an impact when I can and helping out, not just in a sense of recovery, but with the PTA or volunteering at somewhere in town or showing up for friends and, watching their kids' sports and doing things like that and just being more of a healthy, supportive presence and not so much worrying about having a social life. That to me, a social life implies parties and fancy dinners and things, which I'm not knocking those things. I know, I think that everybody should go and do whatever makes them happy in life. I really should, as long as it's healthy, as long as you're not hurting anybody. But for me, I used to feel a pressure of having a social life and having, that going out to dinners or going out to parties or going out. And if you're not, then you're not seeing those, you're living a happy, cool life or whatever. I know what's important to me, I guess, if that makes sense. And I think that just living in a way where living my truth and what I know is to be good for me and my family.
You said that you broke the hearts of your family. What about today? Your family must be incredibly proud of you, Erin.
They are. I actually get kind of emotional. I know they are, and I think that helps too. I think that's a huge driving force in maintaining my sobriety because just, you start to feel like you're making a difference. You start to feel like you're making people proud and that you're helping people. And that's huge, especially compared to where you were when you were at your absolute worst.
You are at your absolute best and getting better. I always say the bright side of addiction is recovery. And Erin, you embody that. I congratulate you on your recovery, on your life, on the decisions that you've made, and on the wonders that you have come to realize in your life.
Well, thank you. I took a lot of people to get me here, and I'm grateful for every single one of them.
I wish you well one day at a time.
Well, thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Erin Slagle. You can find her on social media, including Facebook and Instagram at Erin W. Slagle, and Slagle is spelled Slagle. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you would like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, and as long as you have been in continuous recovery for at least a year or more, please drop us a note, recoverycoasttocoast.net. Now, coming up next, award-winning actress ALi McGraw, another woman in long-term recovery. She has some reflections on recovery and self-worth.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, some thoughts about self-worth from actress ALi McGraw.
When I look at the person I am today, I appreciate what I see. I accept myself. I care about myself. I value myself. Because I want to continue feeling this way, I choose to think self-affirming rather than self-deprecating thoughts. I tell myself, I can do it. I'm capable. I deserve it. I'm worthy. In the past, the way I felt about myself was determined by the deeds and messages of those around me. Today, I know that I alone am responsible for my sense of worth. It's up to me to develop the attitudes and take the actions that will keep me feeling good about myself. Now that I've come to know and respect my true self, I no longer have to hide behind masks, walls, or possessions. My life decisions, including where to live, what to wear, what to own, are motivated by what is good and right for me, what will make me happy, what my real needs are. Self-worth helps me to be comfortable and open around other people, and to be confident in what I do. Especially exciting is the prospect of what I am becoming, of what still lies ahead. Thought for today. As I heal, I develop an increasing sense of worth from the inside out.
That wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, and I certainly hope you have, please share it with at least one other person. Also, feel free to share it via social media. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also, we invite you to hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline. It's free information, and a confidential treatment referral center. Spanish-speaking individuals are available as well. Number is pretty easy to remember, 1-800-622-HELP. And we encourage you to check out findsupport.gov. Now, this is a relatively new website designed for individuals, families, and friends. It has information on how to pay for treatment, including low-cost and free treatment options. You can also find healthcare support there, how to help someone else, or find help for yourself. It's all in one place at findsupport.gov. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout-out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.